Hi there, my name is Skip Lackey, and I am the creator of the Life-Quake Recovery Secrets, and we're going to be talking about how to accelerate recovery from a devastating life-quake and their aftershocks, and today specifically talking about a study, 10 questions, called the A.C.E. study. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. In a previous video on this website, you've learned about life-quakes and the effect that they can have on so many aspects of your life, especially when you've experienced what I call a life-quake pileup, where multiple major life transition events pile up on top of each other, wreaking havoc, total havoc on your life. You've also learned how long they take to get beyond and what you can do to accelerate the time it takes to get your life back on track again in that previous video. Now, I would like to talk to you about a study that could come as a huge shock to some of you if you take it, especially if you've had a rough or challenging childhood. I know that it rocked my world when I first found out about it. This 10-question test was a profound wake-up call for me, and it possibly will be for you too. I was a bit shocked when I took it myself because of the possible predictive nature of the test. That just 10 questions, a simple test about the events that happened during my childhood, could tell me so much about my future health and wellness as I get older and what to look out for. Here's the thing. I grew up in the burbs in an upper middle class neighborhood, had what looked like an ideal childhood. So what do I have to deal with from my childhood? Well, I ended up scoring a 4 out of 10. Now, that might not sound like a lot. Scoring 0 is good, scoring 9 or 10, not so good. I'm somewhere in between, okay? But the end result of what the statistics show about how my health can be impacted because of childhood experiences on a physical, emotional, and behavioral level is huge. I say can because it's a possible outcome for my overall wellness as time goes on. Not definite. Not necessarily probable, but possible, unless something changed. And when I say something, that would be me and my habits, my beliefs, my behaviors, and my relationship to my past. It made me realize why some of the health issues that were coming up for me as I got older were happening, and that I absolutely needed to do certain inner work to counteract the early trauma that I had experienced. Things that I didn't even realize were trauma until I started looking at them in a different way. Seeing that it was a possible issue and taking action allowed me to turn around multiple aspects of my health, especially after fully understanding the ramifications of the long-term effects on my mind and my mental health along with the health of my body. And if I don't investigate what the root cause is, the necessary changes can't be made unless I can first identify it as a possible issue, which is what I did, and things changed. The test is called the A.C.E. study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, 10 questions that can change your life around how trauma during our childhood can impact our health and wellness. So as we go through the 10 questions and learn more about the result from the test, we are then going to go through a 14-question resilience test and also talk about a 2019 research project called the P.C.E. study, Positive Childhood Experiences that can counteract a high A.C.E. score. And I will also give some tips that you'll find useful as ongoing tools to deal with the health effects if you do have an elevated A.C.E. score, and how the session work that I do can complement your current path of healing, and also how you realize that even knowing about this powerful and possibly shocking study can change how you look at life forever. And I hope it does, and that you share it with your family and friends that you think might fall into this category, like me. So let's take a look. Grab a pen and paper, and let's take the A.C.E. test. So here's the test. There are these 10 questions. We're going to go through each one of them one at a time. To find your score, you just have to answer the 10 questions. As you get this piece of paper and pen to write with, here are the questions. When you're growing up during the first 18 years of your life, this will be a yes or no question, and go with your gut response. And now, look, you can kid yourself and tell yourself that you didn't experience things. A lot of us do that. That's a possibility. But if you are not sure I would say to say yes rather than no. And then you can go back and look at this again and make a finer distinction. Okay? So look at it as if it might be true, because a lot of us, and a lot of us that grow up in the same families, have very different perspectives of how we experience life growing up. So here's the first question. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Yes or no? Write down for question 1 the answer. Number 2, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Yes or no? Number 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Yes or no? Number 4, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Yes or no? Number 5, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to a doctor if you needed it? Yes or no? Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Yes or no? Number 7, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or a knife? Yes or no? Number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs? Yes or no? Number 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Yes or no? Number 10, did a household member go to prison? Yes or no? Now, all this is under the first 18 years of your life. Now, add up your yes answers, and this is your ACE score. Take a moment and look at that. So now that you've taken the ACE study and you've taken this test, I want to share a couple things about the result from it. One is, it's almost as if this test is now a little obsolete because of the pandemic and everything that we've just been through, especially for kids that are coming up, because the kids now have all been through a traumatic experience of the pandemic and what we've had to deal with COVID. So it's almost as if everybody starts with at least one ACE score. That's just an observation. But let's talk about this test specifically, because this was done by Kaiser Permanente, and the study was run with over 17,000 participants that Kaiser Permanente put on, and it was run in San Diego County in the mid-90s. And this was in an upper middle class area. So this does not even take into account that there were a lot of lower income and at-risk families that were there. Out of the 17,000 ACE study participants, only 36% had 0 ACE scores. 26% had at least one, And as I said, maybe now everybody that's coming up would have at least one. 16% had two, 9.5% had three, and 12.4% had four or more. Only 36%, right? 64% have at least one ACE score. Some people much more, right? 12.4% have four or more. That's a lot of people as a cross-section of our society. So what is the impact that ACE scores have? As the number of ACE scores increases, so does the risk for negative health outcomes. And when you have four or more, and as I said, I score a 4 on this test, it's something to be concerned about. But even one creates some stress level that needs to be addressed. So let's talk about this. The possible risk outcomes: lack of physical activity going forward as you get older, smoking, the propensity for smoking is there, alcoholism, drug abuse, missed work, right, and absenteeism, severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and even broken bones with osteoporosis increases. People who have experienced trauma are 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic, 4 times more likely to develop a sexually transmitted disease, 4 times more likely to have injected drugs or currently doing that, 3 times more likely to use antidepressant medication, 3 times more likely to be absent from work, 3 times more likely to experience depression, 3 times more likely to have serious job problems, 2.5 times more likely to use and smoke tobacco, and here's the big one: 15 times more likely to commit suicide than people that have no ACE scores. And again, this is for 4 and above. The vast majority of people have experienced some trauma. The study shows that if you score 6 or more, it potentially cuts 20 years off your life. Let's think about that. Your adverse childhood experience could potentially cut as much as 20 years off your life. So let's talk about how the brain experiences trauma, and we can speak about that in a way that will inform you about some of this. First, understand high ACE scores are not rare. They're more common than you think, and we must seek ways to heal these past traumas in our bodies, our minds, our spirits, or our long-term health effects will be greatly impacted, because understanding the roots of addiction, depression, overweight, overwhelming anxiety, and their connection to adverse childhood experiences has been described as a lot of people as a relief. When people hear that this is why they're having some of these unknown experiences, and they see this and they find out about it, then they can do something about it. But until then, it's a question. It's the unknown. So we have to be investigating, answering the question, now what? Now that you know what your ACE score is, what are you going to do about it? You have a foot on the path to health, happiness, and the quality of life right now? Great if you do. And if you don't, again, pay attention. So here's a few other data points that I think are important. ACEs in smoking. If you score 6 or more, greater than 6, you have a 16% chance, higher chance of that being an issue. Chronic depression. 4 or more, 58% of women deal with chronic depression, and 35% of men are 460% more likely to suffer than somebody with 0. Antidepressants. This one is staggering. 50 years later, so say 65, around 65, 99.5% of people that scored a 5 or above are dealing with antidepressant. So now let's talk about the likelihood of childhood sexual abuse versus the number of unexplained symptoms. Up to 8 unexplained symptoms in over 40% of adults if there was childhood sexual abuse. Issues going on and you're not really sure why. Now you're really clear about what it is. This is devastating. If you're 7 above, you have a 35.2% chance of attempted suicide. Those numbers are staggering, right? 1% if you have 0, and 35% if you have 7+. ACEs in adult alcoholism. jump up. ACEs and impaired job performance, absenteeism, right? And this is just 4 or above. Serious financial problems and serious job issues go up with each incident. Incredibly prevalent problems that have lifelong effects. 48% greater chance of contracting cancer, a reduction of lifespan of up to 20 years, massive increases in drug addiction, promiscuity, alcoholism, criminality, suicide, depression, anxiety. So much, 2x greater for cancer, 6 or more, 20 years off your lifespan. Here are some additional information that I think is interesting and upsetting at the same time. For those with an ACE score of 4 or more, depression was prevalent, 66% of women, 30% of men, 5,000% increased likelihood of suicide. If your ACE score is above a 6, more than half, 50% of those with ACE scores 4 or higher reported having learning or behavioral problems at school. That can explain a lot for ADD and ADHD. A score of 6 or more, the likelihood of IV drug usage was 4,600% greater than somebody that scores a 0. Prevalence of rape went from 5% with an ACE score of 0 to 33% at the score of 4 or more. And if you have 6 or more, it produced a 15% greater chance than those with 0 of suffering from one of the leading causes of death. And that could be COPD, heart disease, liver disease. They were twice as likely to suffer from cancer and 4 times more likely to have emphysema. It literally takes your breath away. Now, let's talk about the biology of violence and why this is so important. Over the past few decades, during the first 4 years of life, 90% of a child's brain develops through the experiences of that child. All right? This brain right here shows the brain on the left is a 3-year-old child, normal 3-year-old child. And the one on the right is from a child that's experienced severe sensory deprivation, neglect. You can see how much smaller it is, which explains why the large number of students that are affected by ACE scores. Now, this was a study that was done in Washington State, and it shows out of a classroom of 30, on average, 6 students have 0, 5 students 1, 6 students 2, 3 students 3, 7 students have 4 or more, and 3 students have 6 or more. So we're talking a large percentage of a classroom scores with ACE all, but 22 out of 30 have at least scored 1. And we wonder why children in school, there's a struggle. Okay, so ACEs and impaired childhood memory. If you're 4 or above, 34% deal with childhood memory issues. So the study from Washington State, as a follow-up to the original ACE test, showed students with 3 or more ACE scores 2.5 more times more likely to fail a grade, score lower on standardized tests, have language difficulties, are suspended or expelled more often, and are designated to special education more frequently, and they have poor health, more sick days, they miss school more, which also then places them behind. Here is an interesting study around corporal punishment. Those of us who were spanked can attest to this. Those that were spanked frequently have a lower IQ score of 4 points. Now that may not sound like a lot, but your IQ does not change as you get older. Your EQ goes up, but your IQ is really, it's a fixed mindset, so to speak. Researchers believe that when parents who didn't spank are forced to use more reasoning and explaining while disciplining, and those that were spanked on a regular basis, the average was 3.6 spankings per week, and only 27% of those that were in this study reported that they had no physical punishment or spanking when they were younger. Again, if you were not spanked growing up, you more than likely have a higher IQ score by 4 points. That's the norm. Childhood abuse and depression. So children who were physically abused had a 59% increased risk of major depression disorder. Multiple types of abuse, 75% increased risk. And those who were neglected had a 59% higher rate of depression, right? 59% higher. Physical abuse and cancer. Individuals who have been physically abused as children were 47% more likely to develop cancer than individuals who had not been abused because of the chronic stress that it puts the body in, the fight or flight hormone called cortisol. So let's talk about this. So the brain, how we experience trauma in the brain. Some of you might know this, some of you might not. Just give a quick explanation. So the center of your brain is something called your limbic system, and it's where your emotions are felt. And then you've got your reptilian part of your brain, which is your medulla and your brain stem. That is where your kind of your autonomic nervous system is. So the front of your brain is called your prefrontal cortex, and that's what kicks in with good reasoning. This part of the brain, they've done all this research with meditators that show that this area lights up when you're meditating and you're in a place of parasympathetic nervous system. But when the white matter, which has shrunk when you were younger if you dealt with trauma, is not as connected, the neural pathways, the neural pruning that goes on naturally is less, and until you're 25, your body is still in, your brain is still forming, your neural pathways are still forming. So one of the things they talk about is not to do any kind of drugs or alcohol, marijuana, because it keeps the neural pathways from forming the way that they should. And at the center of the limbic system, there's this little small area called the amygdala. And the amygdala is where the fight or flight response kicks in. And so when we get to the point where we're scared, where something happens, we have an amygdala hijack. And it gets hijacked and it kicks off this fight or flight response. So let's talk about that. What happens? So you've heard of fight, flight, freeze, and now they're starting to talk about feed and what eating does to the system, and then also what sex does to the system. So it's the 5 F's, so to speak. What that does is it kicks off the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. So there's the hypothalamus, which is in the center of your limbic system, which fires off your pituitary, which is where all your hormones actually are generated, and it creates a flood of hormones throughout the body, which then alerts the adrenals, which are sitting on top of your kidneys. When it triggers the adrenals, then the adrenal gland creates cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine, and neoepinephrine. And so there's this big flood of chemicals that go into the system to tell the body to go into fight or flight. And it creates all kinds of things. It raises your heart rate. It pushes your blood from your central organs out to your extremities, gives your brain a little bit more blood. It quickens your breathing. It gives you a certain amount of anxiety, and the fear actually triggers it. But here's what happens. The hypothalamus then goes into overdrive, and it tells the pituitary gland, okay, create more of this. And we get into this cycle where we're going from the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the adrenals, cortisol is being pumped into our system. It puts our body on high alert. And then we go into this cycle where it keeps repeating itself unless we go out of our sympathetic nervous system, which means we're feeling everything, into our parasympathetic, which means that our body then, normalizes the breath rate, the heart rate, everything starts to normalize. So when you have cortisol in your system, it's like battery acid in your blood system. And if that fight or flight syndrome goes on for long periods of time, it is literally damaging your circulatory system. So this is how it affects our health. We have these ACEs, right? These experiences that create fight or flight or freeze. And then what happens is it disrupts our neurodevelopment. The social, emotional, and cognitive impairment starts to happen with the brain and how we're interacting with the world. We adopt a certain amount of health risk behaviors, which are not healthy for us. And over time, that creates this disease and disability and all kinds of social problems, anxiety, overwhelm, chronic stress, which can then lead to the possibility of an early death. So this is how this cycle starts getting kicked off. And the brain is shifting. And so what happens is there are epigenetic shifts, which means above genetics. You have a certain propensity for your brain to operate in a certain way, and then you can start to have these epigenetic shifts. And this is at the very top of the food chain of what we can do to start to shift, because the size and the shape of the brain can be affected. If you've been through a lot of abuse, it's smaller, like we showed in those CAT scans. Neural pruning starts to take place. You create new brain cells every day. You either use it or lose it. So study and understanding and meditation helps so that you can stay out of the default mode network, which is part of your reptilian brain, which kicks off fight, flight, fear. You can quiet your limbic system and your amygdala. The brain-body pathway starts to get informed and be connected a lot more, because your adrenals are not pumping cortisol and adrenaline all the time, and the brain connectivity gets better. And then your telomeres, which are at the end of your genes, they last longer. Those are the things that fall away, and stress creates a deterioration of your telomeres. So shift happens when you work at it. That's the possibility of healing if you've scored high on this A score. So what can be done to counteract an emotionally rough childhood? If you scored more than 3 or 4 on the ACE study, we must do what we can to counteract the trauma of a lifetime with introspection and healing. So how do we do that? Right? Knowing that there's an issue is the first step to doing something about it. We have to learn how to be more resilient. What's the pure definition of resilient? It's the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful again after something bad happens. Resilience is possible. It can be developed. It's a skill. It's an internal, emotional, and physical skill that you can develop, right? We have to become more resilient and flexible like bamboo. So the story is with bamboo is that once it gets planted, it does not go from seed to a plant for 5 years. So what happens is it's getting the nutrients, it's getting the proper water, everything that it needs in the soil, and it's growing its roots very deep. And then when it does start to sprout, it grows super quickly. It grows like a foot a week once it sprouts, and that the roots are so deep that it can withstand gale force winds, hurricane winds. It's flexible, it's strong. We want to become more like bamboo. So one of the things that they found with a recent study from 2019 is something called the positive childhood experience, P.C.Es. There are 7 things that if you experience them, you more than likely can counteract what happened during the adverse childhood experiences in your high ACE score. So let's take a look at these, because we're going to talk about P.C.Es and then we're going to talk about resilience. And I'm going to give you a resilience test, which is 14 questions that this was basically modeled after. So when you were younger, did you have the ability to talk with family about feelings, or at least somebody in your family? If you did, you had a positive childhood experience, and that goes on the positive side of counteracting the ACE experience. Did you have the sense that family was supportive during difficult times? Did you have did you have a grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt, uncle, maybe one of your parents, maybe one of them, there was some abuse there, but maybe the other one was very supportive, or a sibling that felt that there was some support there for you during difficult times? Did you have the enjoyment and participation in community traditions, whether it be in your family, maybe on holidays, or did you have an experience that there was something going on within your community? Maybe you were at a church, a community center, boys club, scouting, or whatever, something along those lines that you could lean on. Maybe you had a sense of belonging in high school. Maybe you were a member of a sports team or some kind of a club where you felt included and you had a good friend group. Did you feel supported by friends? Were they there for you? Were your friends there for you in a good, healthy, and supportive way? If so, you had a positive childhood experience. Having at least two non-parent adults who genuinely cared is really important. Some people outside your family that were adults that gave you a little guidance, mentored you, gave you motivation, some positive attaboys or attagirls and pats on the back. And 7, did you feel safe and protected by at least one adult in the home? Could be an older sibling or one of your two parents. Maybe there was one that was, as I said, that there was some abuse, but you did feel protected, or somebody that would stand up for you. These 7 things, how many did you have of them? They also counteract to create the situation where I said earlier, it's not a definite that if you had a high score that you were going to have these health issues show up or the emotional issues. These counteract it. And I also want to talk about the resilience questionnaire, okay? We talked about these 14 questions. And so what I want you to do is I want you to take a pen and a piece of paper and write down 1 through 14. Just do that right now while you can. And then I'm going to ask you some questions, 14 questions, and I'm going to ask you to grade them. 3 being definitely true, you know that you had that as part of your resilience experience. 1 is probably true. If you're not sure, write down 0. Probably not true is -1. And definitely not true is -3. And then we're going to get a score. So go ahead, get your pen, piece of paper out. We're going to see how your resilience experience when you were younger is. Here are the questions. I believe my mother loved me when I was little. Did you feel love from your mother? Give yourself a score. I believe my father loved me when I was little. Go ahead and score that. When I was little, other people helped my mother and father take care of me, and they seemed to love me. This could be extended family, friends, grandparents, aunts, uncles. Number 4, I've heard that when I was an infant, someone in my family enjoyed playing with me, and I enjoyed it too. Allow yourself to think back and feel when you were tiny. Maybe you saw pictures of it, or you heard stories. Being a happy baby. Number 5, when I was a child, there were relatives in my family who made me feel better if I was sad or worried. Did you have some family members that were there for you? Number 6, when I was a child, neighbors or my friends' parents seemed to like me. You remember being invited over into your friends' houses and having them talk with you, ask you questions about yourself. Maybe they gave you some advice. As we become teenagers, other adults in our life, their opinions seem to matter and penetrate more than our parents do. When I was a child, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, ministers were there to help me. Did you have an extended community? People that cared. 8, someone in my family cared about how I was doing in school. Could be anybody. Did you have that? Were grades important? 9, my family, neighbors, and friends talked often about making our lives better. Did you have dreams? Did you have goals? Did you have a purpose, passion, vision for what you wanted in your life? Did you talk about going to higher education or what it would be like to be an entrepreneur, have a job? Was there a compelling future? Number 10, We had rules in our house and were expected to keep them. Some houses don't have any rules, there's no expectation, and because of that, it creates a real issue. Number 11, when I felt really bad, I could always find someone I trusted to talk to. Did you have that one person, or two or three, that you could really talk to? Good friend, family member. 12, as a youth, people noticed that I was capable and could get things done. Did people see the best in you when you were younger? Did they see that you had a high level of capacity? 13, I was independent and a go-getter when I was younger. And number 14, I believe that life is what you make it. You feel that you have control when you were younger on some level of your life, and you can go out and create what you want. So add up those questions and look at the ones that were probably true and definitely true. So you scored a 3 or a 1. Some of the other ones are going to knock your score down. But how many of these 14 protective factors did you have as a child and youth where you felt confident to circle definitely true and probably true, so that you scored a 1 or a 3 on? Those are the ones you want to look at, and look at how many out of the 14 you scored on. How many of those got circled, and how many of those are still true for you as an adult? Are there some? Do you believe that life is what you make it? Has life beat you up? Are you independent and still a go-getter? Right? So personally, I scored a 14 out of 14 on this. So when I saw this resilience test, and this came after I'd seen the ACE test a number of years later when I found this, I realized that one of the reasons that I'm doing the work that I'm doing is because I had scored really high as a child on that resilience questionnaire, and I also did on the P.C.E. test. That just came out a few years ago. So here's what we can do once we recognize where we're at on that resilience study. We want to develop more of a growth mindset, be able to develop a propensity to face challenges in a good way. Know that with your attitude and your motivation that you have the ability to overcome, taking feedback and being able to listen, asking for help, as opposed to a fixed mindset which believes that you're going to be a failure. You're either not good at it or you're good at it. Nothing's going to change. You're frustrated and give up. You only do what you know. That's having a fixed mindset. Having a growth mindset makes a big difference. Learning about the perception model. The perception model comes from something called neurolinguistics programming. And I use this in my leadership trainings and my personal trainings to help people understand that what they're seeing is outside that VAK, right, is, if you'll look over there, VAKOG, that's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. The map, which is your internal experience, is not the territory. What you experienced and what you're seeing on a regular basis, you go through a series of filters, deletions, distortions, generalizations, beliefs, values, rules, all kinds of different filters. And then what happens is they get turned into a deeper structure of thoughts, internal pictures, internal dialogue. Then they get turned into emotions. Those emotions affect our body. They come back out in the form of behavior and language patterns. And so this cycle is going on all the time, and people wonder why folks don't fully understand or can't grasp what we're saying or what we're feeling, is because there's so much going on internally that it's very difficult for somebody to fully understand what another person is experiencing. You know what it is, and that's what we need to work on and heal your perception of that. Developing emotional intelligence, being able to have self-awareness, the understanding that individual preferences heighten the flexibility in all situations, self-regulation, the self's capacity to alter its behaviors, Motivation, the ability that causes people to act, guide, or have goal-oriented behaviors. That's so important to be able to regulate your emotions, see and be aware of what you're doing and what's motivating you. 4, empathy, being able to hear the message from every person that you come across and keeping an open mind how they're speaking to you and what they're speaking to you about. Compassion, kindness, openness, willingness, trust. Having good communication skills so that you can be flexible to what other people's styles are. Then conflict management, learning to use conflict as a brainstorming and creativity tool. That is so important because we're all going to have conflict. How you react and respond really has a lot to do of you being out of stress. And number 7 is relationship building, being able to build and strengthen these diverse connections that cause you to feel connected to people, to things, to situations, to groups of people, and how you build relationships, which then goes right into team building that builds these support systems even when you're in the middle of chaos. All right, that's really important. Now, the benefits of exercise, let's talk about this. In children, college students, if you are exercising and you're doing that, there is a huge improvement in learning and intelligence scores to overcome the ACE experience. It creates resilience in the brain, resulting in a cognitive reserve. Even just doing some simple physical activity, memory and cognition, it can be an antidepressant, as simple as walking or taking stairs. How does exercise improve the brain? Well, the number of neurons increases in the hippocampus, the spine density increases, and there's a change in the function of neurotransmitters that can activate the monoamine system. So now here's another skill that's of value. Mindfulness practices, and you can do this little one step at a time, being able to be in the moment, being able to recognize what you're feeling, what you're sensing, what you're experiencing, staying out of the thoughts of the negative self-talk, and actually being in the moment when you're really present. Then the next one is meditation. Meditation, there are thousands of studies that show the long-term benefits of meditation and how it grows gray matter and creates new neural pathways within the brain on so many different levels because it takes you out of your sympathetic nervous system and puts you in your parasympathetic. Hey, the simple fact of nature therapy, being able to be out in nature. It's one of the reasons why I moved from New York City here to Boulder, Colorado, because we have an incredible sense of expanse as I look at the mountains. And one of the other things, too, is really being able to take care of yourself, self-care, which also then builds your self-esteem and allows you to take that level of self-esteem, which they've shown that studies that show that 93% of 5-year-olds have a high sense of self-esteem. By the time kids get through high school, that number just drops to 5%. And if you go on and graduate college, it's only 2%. So raising our self-esteem levels with self-care and being able to generate more love within ourselves for ourselves in whatever we're doing and really being there for ourselves and others makes a huge difference. All right? So again, love, self-care, self-esteem, they all are one great big cycle. So we need to learn how to increase being more loving, and we do that through forgiveness and all through everything that we do. So let's talk about some of the goals that we might be thinking. So we got this goal, we want to be healthier in life, and we want to live our best life. Now, we've talked about a lot of things. I'm just going to do a quick review. Therapy, this is not an alternative, what I'm talking about. This is in complement to whatever path you're on with your medical doctor, your therapist. Having more structure, beliefs, vows, daily structure, having routine is very important. Exercise, we know the value of that. Self-exploration, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, understanding where the issues have been so that we can make the difference in them. Mindfulness practices are huge, right? Being in nature, as we talked about, would allow us to become more resilient and practice being able to let things come and go as they come to us in the moment, self-care, as we've mentioned, building self-esteem, emotional intelligence skills, self-awareness skills, which is all there, meditation, one of the best things you could do on a regular basis. And they say that if you meditate 11 days in a row, that you've got a 92% chance of meditating on a regular basis after that. So do an 11-day challenge with yourself. Stable relationships, attachment theory, if you don't know about that. When you've had some trauma, it really creates levels of attachment issues for being able to create good, stable relationships going forward. And the main thing is love, right? We need to just embrace that more towards ourselves and towards our others and those around us. So this is a big version, just kind of an overview. And if you've looked at the last video that I did on life-quake.com, we talk about the touchstone model, which is taking a nonlinear life, pulling it apart, making it very linear so we can start to look at certain aspects of our life, what our beliefs are, how we've lived our life, where our blocks are, so that we can then go back to being able to allow ourselves to see the big picture and go back into life without the trauma that's there. So we've talked about all these on that previous video. Who experiences Life-Quake pileups? What do I do when they happen? Where do they happen on the journey? When will I recover and get back to normal? Why am I feeling stuck? Talk about the ACE score, the resilience score. So I want to talk about two more things. Let's just take away all of that because that's in the previous video that you watched. What I want to do is I want to remind you of what's on offer here. So if you've been through this and you're thinking, what can I do? Near the bottom of this page, you're going to see a place to sign up for a free, no-obligation discovery call to help you accelerate your life and heal your current Life-Quake pileup. And a Life-Quake are those transitions which then bring your awareness, which is why you're at this page right now, because something caught your attention, so that you can then talk about it. So you've gotten this offer to get on the phone and speak with me. I hope you take me up on it. And the other thing is right below it, I've written this ebook called The 8 Secrets to Raising Your Happiness Set Point. There are certain skills, and we've talked about a lot of them here today, that you can do this 30-day challenge, and it's self-guided. You know, you can take it on your own and do some of these behaviors and bring some of these skills into your everyday routine. So just below that, if you send me your email, I will email you a link that will take you to a page where you can download these 8 secrets to raising your happiness set point. And it's my gift for watching all the way to the end of this video. All right, so the Life-Quake recovery session, Skip Lackey. You know, I hope that as you've watched this, you've gotten something out of it and that you've realized that there's so many of us that have dealt with this. You're not, it's not rare. It's very common, more common than we'd like to admit. And there are specific ways and things that you can do to overcome it. So I hope that you found value in this. If you have, you know what, give me a call. I'd love to meet and talk with you. No obligation. It's how I give back. And I can talk to you a little bit more about some tools or some ways of guiding yourself through this experience now that you've heard of this. All the best to you. Many, many blessings.